back. WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. It's been a little while since I've visited with this fellow. I mean, why would Baltimore and Washington get together and speak to each other if sports weren't playing? Dave Preston covers all things sports, and to honor Dave, I've broken out my Maryland Sporticulture Magma lamp. The magma is not fully flowing right now because it sort of stopped back in March when Maryland was a top 10 team. Dave, last I checked with you, I think I had you on like the week before the pandemic began, and we were discussing like bracketology, who's going where, Big Ten tournaments, how the Terps are going to do, all of that. And 6 months later, from the sports perspective, there hasn't been much beyond conjecture until this weekend, and now that baseball has started and the Marlins decided to let the kids play on Sunday up in Philadelphia, I think the whole thing remains very much in the balance, and I'm not sure this is a good idea to begin with, right?
This is a very surreal time, a very surreal 6 months. I mean, I think in early March we were talking. I want to say maybe the Monday or the Tuesday after Maryland wrapped up the big share of the Big Ten championship, and it was like, what would it take for this March to be a successful one? Because for the most part, under Coach Turgeon, they haven't succeeded. They haven't gone to that next level in the final month of the season. And then to know, all of a sudden, know that, you know what, there's not going to be a final month of the season. That was kind of tough for everybody who follows college hoops for a living and follows it as a passion. And I'm thankful that we just have sports back. I was excited when we had golf back a few months ago, just because there would be something that you could watch. And when you look at the different sports, Nestor, golf might be the easiest one to hold. Same with auto racing because there's minimal contact. Baseball should be fairly easy as well compared to football, where you're hitting on every play, basketball where there's contact and you're in these shorts where a lot of times it's skin on skin, and hockey where there's hitting and you're in these dressing rooms / locker rooms that are the size of my closet. So you'd think that baseball, they would be able to do it. They would be able to handle it a little bit better. And you're right. All of a sudden, Timmy from Towson's pumped because his Birds have won 2 of 3, and he can't try to see them get 3 of 4 when they play a Marlins team that there are a few guys who aren't playing, but even at full strength, this Marlins team, I don't think is slated to compete until 2024. Thank you, Derek Jeter.
You can find Dave Preston at WTOP down in Washington. They will be monitoring Wizards and Capitals and Nationals and the Washington football. I almost said the R word. I'm trying to stay away from the R word. You can follow Dave out at Dav Presto out on Twitter, where comedy, sports, and Washington, D.C. sort of intersect. You retweeted a Boswell piece on Monday that I have not seen yet. Every sport has a coronavirus plan. MLB's lasted 4 days. We see our national tendency toward willful pandemic ignorance being played out in small, crystal clear states. Everyone can get the message. Where are you on? I mean, we're sports people, right? Like, we make our living doing sports. I have never believed this is a good idea. If I were a player, it wouldn't be a good idea for me. If it were my son or daughter, it wouldn't be a good idea for them. Certainly with my wife being a 2-time leukemia survivor and a diabetic, that this is a bad idea for me to go out and get the disease and bring it home to her. I shudder to think what's going on and what happened in the Miami Marlins clubhouse on Sunday morning, where Don Mattingly got the kids together and said, we know Johnny over here has the plague, but, we got to get the game in today. And, you stayed 6 feet away from Johnny, right? He didn't cough on you, did he? So let's go play the game today. I mean, the people being left in charge of this are really the problem, right? Like, there are no grown-ups in the room when the NFL owners are getting together and saying, this is about money, this is about America, this is about getting the country back together again and moving forward. That's my Jerry Jones for you. But this is a bad idea, and I've said all along it's a bad idea, and certainly looked like a bad idea for the Miami Marlins and the Baltimore Orioles and the Philadelphia Phillies and the New York Yankees on Monday night.
And the thing is, I think Sean Doolittle put it best last month when he spoke, and he said, something along the lines, Nestor, that sports is the reward for society that gets stuff done right. I think that's a paraphrase. I actually refer to sports is the dessert of a productive society. How do you expect to, if you don't eat your meat, how do you get your pudding or something along those lines?
Just like that. Very nice. Very nice. I will drop some Floyd in here before it's over with. I saw what you did.
Please.
I will.
So, and it's okay. Yes, we can do these things, but we have to do A before we can do B. And I think you also look at, by having teams play in their home stadiums, you're adding more variables. And what I love about a lot of coaches and managers and players in sports is they say, hey, we can only control what we control the controllables. And I think with teams playing at home, instead of what they probably maybe should have done is go to 3 or 4 hub cities or even 6 hub cities. I don't know how you do it, but that's what those people who are earning 6-figure salaries in Major League Baseball should have been doing, instead of holding a spitting match on how many games and how much we're going to play these players.
And beyond that, how many are going to get sick? I mean, what's the number? What's the magic? Is one sickness in the corner enough to shut down a Marlins game? Dr. Fauci and every epidemiologist in the world would tell you yes. The minute you have one, you shut it all down. That's the way. That's why they're playing baseball in Japan and Korea right now. That's why they're playing soccer in Europe right now. But we're not doing it that way.
No, and it's very concerning when you see, I think the total amount of players and people in the Marlins organization is up to 14 if the latest numbers were correct on Monday, and you don't know. I mean, that 14 might be, it's as though you're playing blackjack because you don't see what's on, you don't see the other card, and that. It might be a 2. Okay, so there might only be 16, or that might be a 10. So you know what? There's 24 people who have COVID-19. And with again, this is a new disease, a novel virus that we know not nearly enough about. And to see 8 players test positive, 2 coaches, and then now 14 total players in that Marlins organization. If there was one team that I had to choose, it's like there will be an outbreak with one team. I would think that a team from Florida or maybe Arizona or Texas would have higher odds. And then a team run as well or as not well as the Marlins, they would be a high candidate as well, just because of how things have percolated down there over the years. It's unfortunate because we want these games to be played. You hear interviews from a guy like Davey Martinez who had heart issues last year. He is in a risky situation dealing with all the players and stuff like that on a daily basis, trying to keep social distancing. It's a challenge for everyone to learn that this grand experiment of, okay, we're going to do things right lasted 3.5, 4 days is kind of discouraging.
Dave Preston is our guest. He is down in the nation's capital. Some would call it the dark side of the moon. Daniel Snyder calls it home. Some thoughts on all of this? I mean, this has been the biggest story in your market. I mean, certainly from a sports perspective last week, it sort of gobbled everything up. I mean, Dan Snyder was everything this side of the Son of Sam last week on the internet prior to the sexual harassment allegations. Certainly no small thing, but he was accused of just about everything in the days before that. Probably including the plague itself. You've been down there from the beginning of all this, but I want you to go into your background a little bit because you sort of flew into this. I always kid you off air. You're from my wife's hometown in Manchester, New Hampshire, and Bedford, New Hampshire. I don't even know your background of how you wound up in D.C. I mean, I used to go to games at RFK Stadium when we didn't have a football team in Baltimore, right? So, and they were tough tickets, and the Redskins owned the city, and the Orioles owned Baltimore. Boy, the last 15, 20 years where the Nationals are the defending World Series champs, the football team is in disgrace. Our baseball team's a mess here, and our football team we're trying to get on the field as the best team in the sport. But for the Redskins, watching this over the 23 years of the Ravens, and watching it from a media perspective, where lots of my buddies would cover one team, Bill Gilday, who just passed a few weeks ago, he would cover both, and he would always say, I come up to Baltimore because you get treated like a human being up here. You know, like the shades were always down. It was always us against them from the minute Dan Snyder bought this team and started, like, suing the city paper, right?
Right. It was very strange. I moved here in 2000, so he had owned the team for, I want to say, maybe a year and change. And I came down here the year that they had what was referred to as the Fortune 500 team. He spent a fortune to get to 500. He brought in all those free agents, and it just they had already moved out of RFK, so I never had to. I never got the experience, but you'd come down and people would talk about how this was a Redskins town at the time, and how if you wanted to if you wanted to see a weird, zombie apocalypse world, drive around on Sunday at 3 p.m. because nobody will be out. Get your shopping done then if you need to do a lot of stuff. And I think I think it's a very intriguing case, Nestor, on how brand supremacy isn't forever. You look at companies that were on that were in the Dow Jones Industrial Average 100 years ago. The vast majority of them aren't there today. Brands rise and fall. Empires turn back to sand and stuff like that. A Moody Blues line for you this morning or afternoon. And you see how different brands fade. And I think the burgundy and gold brand started to fade when they left RFK. And all of a sudden, you had a lot of people who had access to these games who didn't have access before, who didn't necessarily behave well. And a lot of the old school people who came to these games from 1960, 1970, all of a sudden didn't want to drive to Landover 10 times a year to see the games, or 8 times during the regular season. So they gave away their tickets to AFC games. They gave away their tickets to the Lions and stuff like that. Or maybe they sold their tickets to the Cowboys game because they knew that could help them make their money back. And you really lost what was a home field advantage for the Redskins during that time. Meanwhile, you had the product on the field that couldn't match it. And there were many missteps. There was the Vinny Serrato era that was more of an error, and somehow he outlasted quite a few coaches. I actually compared him to Rasputin in a piece because he was not going away in any way, shape, or form. You could run him over with the train, throw him in the river. No, Vinny was going to come back. And then when they brought Bruce Allen, and you thought, okay, because Vinny was such a figure of disdain, basically Mickey Mouse would have been seen as a competent GM, and he probably would have done a better job over the years than Bruce Allen. A couple of coaches under Allen's tenure didn't work out, and now we have this new era with Ron Rivera. Meanwhile, you have you can't get inside somebody's head and heart. You can't play psychologist, but you just don't know what kind of a guy Dan Snyder is. And I mean, his wife's a cancer survivor. He's a family guy. He has kids, and that's fantastic. But then you hear about him chopping trees, illegally, so he can get a better view on the Potomac.
Well, when Mike Nolan told me about the gallon of vanilla ice cream dumped all over his desk, there aren't many good stories about Dan Snyder with people that have been on the inner circle with me. I had a meal with him one night about 10 years ago. He offered me the radio station that he owned, the Red Zebra stations. He wanted to sell them to me. Yeah, that was the first conversation I had with him, probably the last. Marvin Lewis said, "Hey, Nestor owns the radio station in Baltimore." He's like, "I own some stations in D.C. You want to buy them?" I had him on the air 20 years ago when I was on Sporting News Radio, but I've not had I don't know anyone with anything positive to say about human experience with him, and that would be all the coaches that work for him, the players that played there, all of that. And all that being said, the Redskins name and the way he held on to it, and now the way the organization has been run, and the way this thing looks completely orchestrated, and now they don't have a name, and Ron Rivera's involved in picking the name. I mean, every part of this, if I'm a Redskins fan, I run like hell, in the way that I'm an Orioles fan, and I have held my nose at the stench of this.
Right. I think this is definitely a very, very strange year on multiple fronts. And I think the fact that he dug his heels into it, when a successful person like him doesn't like to be told what to do. And last decade, when he was asked, "Do you think you're ever going to, get rid of the name?" And he's like, "No, you can put it in caps. We will never change the name." He doesn't like being told what to do because, he made a ton of money at an early age before a lot of people make their money at different ages, and you see how different people who get money before they're able to fully mature as a person, how that affects them. You look at child stars, you look at young rock stars who have money, you look at players in the NBA and the NHL and Major League Baseball who they get that first big paycheck before they're able to fully experience life and the ups and downs. And if you get money later in life, there's the theory that, you'll be able to handle it better. You'll be able to handle yourself better. He made his money early, very successful, and it's allowed him to behave in any way that he's seen fit, whether it's being demanded to be called Mr. Snyder by everyone in the organization and parents of his kids' friends and stuff like that. Whether it's
imagine how much of a dick you have to be to do that when you're 40 years old.
Oh yeah,
just imagine what your psychology would be, and then put $1 billion in your pocket and go from there. Right, literally.
Oh yeah.
But how this relates to the franchise and how the league relates to this and how the partners relate to this and whether they really want this guy owning the team anymore, kicking guys out of the league. They did that with Jerry Richardson, but there has to be a clear demarcation of what they want. 20 years of this would be the time if the NFL owners want to hurl him over the side of the boat. This would be a good time to do that.
Yeah, yes, but you know what? For every Dan Snyder who's in the gray area and maybe pushing over, there are probably at least 5 to 10 other owners who are kind of similar shady stuff here and there. You look at the Colts owner, Jim Irsay, who has had issues over the years.
Jimmy Haslam, put him in there too. Throw him in there.
Oh yeah, well, and it's just with if you've read the story, it's just harrowing about. He's at first, an aside on Jim Irsay, I lived in Muncie, covered the Colts during the first, I think, the first 2 years of the Peyton Manning era.
I did not know this about you. I'm learning things. Let me get some popcorn, Dave Preston.
Oh, you know it. I mean, I covered Ball State. I was down there the day that Edger and James and Peyton were both drafted on different years. Met Archie Manning and the like, and I'm like, who the heck is this guy? Oh, that's Cooper. Never mind. But no. So Jim Irsay seemed like such a fantastic owner because he was so much better than the packet of sludge that was Bob Irsay. But you look at him; he's got issues. You look at because we're not in the Charlotte market, we didn't know exactly the extent of Jerry Richardson's stuff. Just like there are a lot of people who aren't in the DC market who, until recently, haven't gotten the full brunt of, oh my goodness, this is what Dan Snyder does. And I'm sure there are a lot of owners who say, you know what, I'm not completely on the up and up in what I do. I don't want there to be an avenue for us to get rid of owners unless there is something, unless there's a smoking gun. So I think Snyder survives this. I don't know if the harassment piece in the Washington Post was something that they put out there to throw some fish, overboard, or some meat to the wolves. I don't know if you remember when Scott McLuhan was fired by the team. All of a sudden, you had a lot of leaks and sources in the Washington Post about what a bad guy he was. All of a sudden, that came from inside that building in Ashburn, and you wonder if something was set in motion to be thrown to the Washington Post to keep to basically keep the heat off of the owner and to basically serve up Larry Michael and some other people as sacrificial lambs.
He is Dave Preston, Dav Presto, the way to follow him out. And when basketball begins, he'll be all over it. He's Basketball Dave. And college sports looks like that's not going to be happening anytime soon. But for you, the defending World Series champion, Washington Nationals, anything you got on that that would be of interest here in Baltimore other than we're supposed to get together a couple of times here? But following that and seeing Dave Martinez said he's legitimately scared and where they are, you win a championship, you don't even get a chance to really sort of celebrate it the right way. It kind of sucks. It doesn't bother me being from Baltimore, but the fact that you don't get to hang the banner and have everybody, it stinks. That's all. It stinks for everybody.
It's kind of a bummer. But you're thankful that that's the biggest issue right now. I think the first weekend for the Nats, they did drop 2 of 3 to the Yankees, and even though it's just one series, the Masson analyst F.P. Santangelo said that in theory these games are worth 2.7 because of the proration of the schedule. But with a 16-team playoff, it's almost akin to the strike year, I feel, in 1982 when you had Detroit and Cleveland, teams that finished 4 and 5 in the regular season. They still made the playoffs. They didn't advance, but they still made the playoffs. And you had, I think, a 6th seed, the New York Jets, make it all the way to the AFC Championship game behind Richard Todd. So there are possibilities, no matter how mediocre you might be during the season. But in losing 2 of 3 to the Yankees, the Nats showed a lot of things that they showed when they started 19 and 31. Bad situational hitting, inconsistent defense, poor base running, and a bullpen that was shaky at the most inopportune time. Patrick Corbin pitched an absolute gem, the best start of any of the guys on the first turn of the rotation. He had a shutout through 6 1/3 innings, gives up a home run. Bullpen comes in, gives up another home run, and they wind up losing. So, I mean, I think the season's too early to really panic at this time, but you see a lot of the seeds of what started last year's 19 and 31 start that had you concerned. I do a piece in my Nats notebook on Preston's Perspective at WordPress. I do a little segment on the Birds are back in town or break up the Birds. Last year it was O's Woes. And this, so it's just a little thing tracking the Orioles as well, because I do know that we have neighbors to the north that are curious in Washington baseball.
Yeah, we're curious.
Well, yeah, but and there are still people down here in D.C. who the Orioles are their first team, and there are those who still make a point to go to Camden Yards at least once or twice a year. One of my best friends who used to live in Arlington, he's now up in Andover, Mass. Every time he comes down, he needs to go to Camden Yards because even though he's a Red Sox fan, he is in love with that stadium. So you've got that.
Well, it's open, but not to customers, at least for now,
No.
and we'll see how it goes. The one thing about this baseball for no one in the empty stadiums, it really is tough to watch. I love baseball. I've loved baseball my whole life. As I've gotten older, I like it less. I like the game less. I like the people around it less. I like all of these kinds of conversations less. I like the competitive imbalance less. I like the shift less. There's a lot of things I like less about it, but the one thing that I love is the sound and the excitement and the strategy and the color and all of that. Boy, that's really lacking when there are no fans. They tried this 5 years ago here, Dave, planning a game for nobody. It was a bad idea, and now they're going to play 2 months' worth, allegedly, if they don't have the Marlins plague, that they're going to play these games. I just think as a television viewer, as a guy who loves sports and has discussed sports for a living, at 7 o'clock every night, Guy Fieri is more interesting than an Orioles Nationals game will be to me 2 weeks from now, especially if the Orioles can't win a World Series. And I'm not even sure they're going to get to that point to have the integrity of keeping the season together. 4 days into it, we've already got questions. We have canceled games. But the whole notion that this was going to be a good idea work and somehow baseball fans were just going to run to their TV and watch this sort of flat, lightweight, bad product. Baseball on TV for no one is not very good. It really isn't.
And a lot of it's the sounds, too, of the stadium. I mean, obviously the visual of not seeing anybody there, but the sounds, I don't know who's mixing the audio board with the crowd and stuff like that, for Masson down here, but the games on radio sound and feel much better than the games on TV do. And maybe it's a product of the announcers and who knows, but it's a tough watch knowing that there's no one at the ballpark. If you're listening, you're not focused on the fans of the ballpark, so you're not saying, okay, yeah, there's no one there. You're right. It is a very tough situation.
Leave it to a radio guy to tell me I should listen to the games on radio and it would be better. You're right about that.
Yeah. Oh, hey, you know what? Oh, yeah, exactly. Oh, and WTOP's AM 1500 is the Nats affiliate. How about that? Free game at X. Craig Heiss is doing the post game this weekend.
Tell Craig I said hello. Yeah, absolutely.
Are you okay? And one thing I want to ask you, Nestor, with the DH being used in every game this year, are you a DH guy or a National League rule?
I've been arguing this since my dad got me. I still own a dump the DH bumper sticker. Some whack job up there in New England used to sell those in the back of Baseball Digest back in the late 70s and early 80s, so I have one. My dad, I was born in 68, so I started going to games in 73, right? I had this conversation with John Sherrills a couple of weeks ago. You can go listen to that in the BuyAToyota.com audio vault, because I asked him as an old-timer, I'm like, when the DH came about, you were an American League guy, like, was it heresy? He's like, no, it wasn't heresy for me. I had Hal McRae.
Yeah, seriously.
Right, but I think that when you take your mind back to 1973, there might have been a young executive like John Sherrills that thought this will be good for the game. But I have a feeling that certainly in the National League, all those owners and people then thought it was a bad idea. Certainly the owners have poo-pooed it for 47 years because they don't want to pay another DHer to mash, right, in the National League.
Right.
It's about money more than anything else. But from a strategy perspective, I've never minded it. I must say that when I watch the National League game over my lifetime, there is that interest level that you better have a better bullpen, you better have bats on the bench, you better have a manager that pulls double switches, and it's a much more thinking man's game. That being said, every time I ever watched a pitcher bat, I said the American League's better. So I can walk the middle and say I'm shocked that it took 47 years for it to happen. I really am, because it's a better game. If they want to make their game better, they won't have guys with a lifetime batting average of .038 who make contact twice a year on foul balls bad. That's not right. That's not good content. So if the beginning of this is your games stink on TV because nobody's there and they stink and it's a bad television product, in the same way that if America's American Idol was a bad television product, no one would watch a talent competition. You can like baseball and still think it sucks. You can hate baseball and still think Ben McDonald does a nice job, because he does. But I guess the DH, it's time. I thought this would have happened 30 years ago, quite frankly. So the fact that it took this long, it's going to make the games better. So for that, I'm interested in it, but I will miss. And especially if I'm somebody like you that's been watching National League ball for 20 years exclusively, there's a part of the way I think about the game that is gone forever. And that's a shame. That really is a shame. That's almost like an extinct part of the strategy that's gone.
Well, yeah, and then the double switches late. We always get in with, Dave Ginsburg of the Associated Press, who will come down. He's usually in Baltimore. He'll come down for a handful of series in D.C., and he rues the double switch. He's not a fan of it. But, I
had a talk with Dave.
Provide some late inning intrigue, and it forces a team to be better from players 1 through 25 as opposed to just 1 through 10, 11, or 12, because you might need to pinch, you're going to pinch hit at some point in time for the pitcher. So you need a better bat, you need better replacements and stuff like that. But I was surprised when I was a kid that there are two leagues, they play two different ways. It felt like it was akin to having the Western Conference of the NBA having a 3-point shot and the Eastern Conference not, or something along those lines.
Well, dude, I hope that we get through this thing, and I hope at some point you and I are together in the nation's capital, hopefully with a new leader, and better be a new leader or we won't be together.
I just hope we get a new James Bond movie this fall. No Time to Die was supposed to come out in April. Oh,
I have a story for you that's a James Bond story. You ready for this one? 2 weeks ago, I got you're a media member, so you're familiar with these PR web wires. So a friend of mine's a PR person for Topps baseball cards as well as Stratomatic, Joe Favorito. And I got an email from Joe about Stratomatic on the eve of the season playing a game between Drew Carey and Slim Jim Phantom. Are you familiar with Slim Jim Phantom? He's the drummer from the Stray Cats, okay? So Slim Jim, okay?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
right.
Slim, he stood and played the Skins, right? So I said, man, I'm going to look – I'm not going to get Drew Carey on the show because, he's Drew Carey, probably won't do it. But I bet Slim Jim will come on and talk some music with me. So he
gets his dinner from a garbage can.
Meow. Right, exactly. So I look him up, and I've never interviewed Slim Jim. I have interviewed Brian Setzer, of course, on the Brian Setzer Orchestra and the Stray Cats, and my music background from 30 years ago, my Almost Famous thing. So I saw them play at Hammerjacks back in 1989, and I found the night and the set list and all of that. So I prepare to interview Slim Jim Phantom, okay? And look, I'll talk to any rock star, especially one from Long Island who loves baseball, and you can go listen to this interview out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. But I'm on the backside of Slim Jim Phantom's wiki, and it says he was married to actress Britt Ekland from 1984 to 1992 and has a son born with her. So I'm thinking,
freaking way.
Well, that's what I said. I said, no freaking way. And it turns out the Wise Market that is located in Middle River, if for folks familiar where Al's Seafood and where Stemmers run, there's a Wise Market that was a Mars supermarket that's in a plaza. In that plaza, Dave Preston, in 1973, when I was a little boy, the Man with the Golden Gun played at the Highway Theater. And right around the time my dad took me to see my first baseball game, I saw my first James Bond movie. And the bouncing breast of Lulu singing the Man with the Golden Gun theme song, and Christopher Lee and Hervé Villechaize. And I went down a rabbit's hole on the internet at 3 a.m. when I saw that Britt Ekland was married to Slim Jim, that I went into the Hervé Villechaize movie that's on Netflix. And I went into a total rabbit hole James Bond place that only you would appreciate, Dave Preston.
Oh, yeah.
I had pictures of
Sheriff
Phuket.
J.W. Pepper went on to be the guy who played Clifton James, Sheriff J.W. Pepper from those movies, That and Live and Let Die, played Charlie Comiskey in 8 Men Out.
I Googled all of that. I went way, way, way deep into the Roger Moore hole. Did you see the Roger Moore story of the little boy that ran into him in a train station? Did you ever read that story when Roger Moore died?
Is this the one? Is this the one where he said that he was called James Bond and that he's like, Blofeld is out or something along those lines? And then he runs into him years later, and Moore doesn't know, and then he gets in. He's like, "Oh, I was just making sure that the agents weren't around to get me." Or Roger Moore, he wasn't everyone's favorite James Bond.
He was mine,
but I think no one was more comfortable in the tuxedo and appreciated the role and enjoyed it more than he.
When my wife and I went to Hong Kong in 2007, we went to the Four Seasons Hotel and to the junk that they were on, and we went to the Bottoms Up Club. It's in Lang Kwai Fong. I know all of this off the top of my head, which was the nightclub that James Bond had his martini. Shaken, never stirred, right? So all of that. So, I did all of that, but I interviewed Slim Jim Phantom about Stratomatic baseball that he's played his whole life, and he was married to Britt Ekland. So I figured there's your James Bond piece for the day, Dave. I give you a little something you didn't think you were going to get here on WNST. How about that?
I can go back to sleep. Woo-hoo!
All right, get some rest. We'll see you soon, all right?
Always a pleasure, Nestor.
Wake up, Dave Preston. They might play a baseball game at some point. He is Dave Preston, Dav Presto. The way to find him out on Twitter. He opines on all things sports in the nation's capital, WTOP. You can find him out there. Also, Preston's Perspective is where he does all his blogging. He does lots of blogging. We are Facebook friends. We are Twitter followers. He's a good man, and I'm sorry that we can't get together for a Capitals game sometime soon, but I'll be following him. You can follow me at Baltimore Positive and at WNST.net, where we're calm, we're local, and we're here to stay.